my name's Paige. Welcome to my channel. Oh my god, I can't believe this is happening. I'm filming a book video. Okay, it's time. So, today we're gonna do something a little bit different from my vlogs, which I'm super excited about. I feel like I should be like standing because I just feel like I need to like move. I don't know. We are going to be going over what I've read so far in 2019. Since I've not been on YouTube for that long, there are a lot of books that I have to go over since I wasn't doing monthly updates. So we're going to be going over 24 books today. 5 of those books are actually Harry Potter rereads, so I'm not going to spend that much time on those, so that'll kind of take away some of that time. And 2 of them I actually already unshelved, so you'll see what those are later. Plus, I have a couple of school assigned reading books in here that I probably won't spend that much time on simply because, I don't know, do you guys document like what you read for school? Because I feel weird about it. It's like I don't read as closely when I'm doing an assigned reading, which now that I'm thinking about it, wouldn't it make more sense to read those more closely? But anyway, so that'll take a little bit of time off since this will be a bit of a longer video. Just a heads up about what I've read so far this year. I haven't really pushed myself to like go out of my comfort zone. In fact, I've actually reverted into my comfort zone. So I've actually kind of gone back to romance novels. In fact, you're about to see me talk about this book by E.L. James, and we'll get into that later. So before I get started with the unique books that I read this year, let's talk about Harry Potter. So about every other year, I completely reread the Harry Potter series, but usually I don't read the books, I listen to the audiobooks by Jim Dale. If you've never heard of Jim Dale or you've never tried the Harry Potter audiobooks done by him, I highly recommend trying them. I grew up listening to these audiobooks and they still have the same impact on me, to the point where when I read the books, it's not like they're worse than the audiobook or something. It's just that I don't have the same attachment to them. He reads them in a way where he only has to subtly change his voice for you to know who he's speaking as. Plus, he's just really good at conveying all kinds of moments, like the comedic moments, the absolutely heart-wrenching moments. He's good at all of it, so I would highly recommend. So anyway, let's get started with January. The first thing I read in January was actually Rhapsodic, which is the first book in the Bargainer series by Laura Thalassa. I don't know how to pronounce her last name, I'm sorry. I'm just gonna be upfront about it. I was really missing ACOTAR by Sarah J Maas. I was just like on a kick and I felt like I needed to fill that obsession, so I heard of this book because it's supposed to be very similar. If you're wondering, yes, it is very similar. Whereas ACOTAR is more of a new adult, this is definitely adult. It's basically set in a world where all supernatural creatures or professions are kind of a real thing. And our protagonist is a siren who runs kind of like a supernatural investigative firm, kind of. But throughout her life, she's actually been getting favors from the Bargainer. Even though I enjoyed it throughout and I would probably give it 3 stars, it's definitely not a book that would encourage me to read the next book in the series. Like I was content with this book. Anyway, for thumbs on this one, I'm probably gonna go with a thumbs up. It just depends on what you're looking for. I was kind of looking for a filler book and that's what I got. So the second book I read in January was actually Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. This is the first book in the Nevernight series, and I actually did read the second book, God's Grave, later on in the year. Prior to these books, I had never read Jay Kristoff before. I do have Illuminae, but I haven't gotten the chance to read it yet. And I was really incredibly impressed. He's definitely one of my favorite fantasy authors now because he just has a way of being extremely serious and extremely hard-hitting in the way that he writes, but also hilarious. And you don't usually get, and at least in my experience, you don't usually get actually comedic writers when you're reading fantasy. It's kind of like a trade that you make, like the more realistic the world, the less funny it gets usually. Not only is the comedy present in the actual novel, but he also includes a lot of footnotes, which are chock full of world stories that are hilarious and also gruesome and also amazing. Yeah, if you can't tell, I really like Jay Kristoff. So anyway, this book follows a girl named Mia who wants to be an assassin to avenge her family. The premise probably sounds a little cliche, and especially in the book times we're in right now where assassins are definitely a thing, but I would definitely say that this does it different and it does it correctly. Mia is terrifying. I mean, she's a teenage girl, but she's also much more mature. Like, she's went through a lot of stuff and it actually affects her in realistic ways. I never doubted the reasons why she made decisions because she's very ambitious and she's very driven. Plus, J. Kristoff is really good with side characters. They always surprise you, they always intrigue you, and they definitely carry the story forward. I would definitely give this book a thumbs up, and I think I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads, so definitely read the series. And the third book, Dark Dawn, is coming out soon, I think. Okay, so getting into February. The first book I read in February was Night by Elie Wiesel. This was actually a book I read for my history course, and I was very pleasantly surprised. It's a very short nonfiction book. It's under 200 pages. It's probably about 120. And it follows Eli, a teenager who was sent to Auschwitz with his father. I didn't read a lot of Holocaust literature in high school or middle school. I think a lot of people did. I think a lot of people read this in school, but I did not. So I didn't have any expectations about it. I think it would be hard to explain this book because it's so short and yet it's so impactful. I think if you have any interest in Holocaust literature or just good nonfiction, then you should definitely give this book a try, especially because it took me less than a day to read. Get 2 thumbs up on this one because I'm not even that big into nonfiction and I really enjoyed it. Alright, next up in February we have Foliage Herb by Diana Gabaldon. This is the 3rd book in the Outlander series, and so I can't really give you the plot of it without kind of spoiling the beginning, but basically if you don't know what Outlander is, it's about a woman in the 1940s who goes on vacation with her husband to Scotland, and there she ends up touching a stone, a standing stone as they call them, and being transported back into the 1700s. That's kind of all I'll say about that, but I will say that this has one of the best male romantic interests I've ever read in a novel ever. Like, definitely the most, and also the most unique. Like, that's all I'll say there. I do think that this will be my last book that I read in this series, or at least I'll take a big break before the next one I read, because these are really big books and it's definitely a big commitment for me. So it's a thumbs up, even though my favorite book in the series so far has been the first one, Outlander. So keep that in mind if you're going to continue the series or even start the series. A little later in February, I finished The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This is about a girl named Rin who kind of grows up in the South, which is kind of predominantly farmers, poverty, and she studies to get into one of the academies. No one really thinks that she's gonna make it or she's gonna do well in the exam, but she ends up getting into the most elite military school in the country. I won't say too much else about that, but you should know if you read this that there's a lot of aspects of shamanism and military tactic. If you're interested in that stuff, or if you're interested in Eastern philosophy, then this is a really interesting book. However, if you don't have a strong stomach for gore or for just brutality, maybe lean away from this book. You probably didn't expect me to give that warning, and I honestly didn't expect it when I was reading this book, but it's definitely something to keep in mind because it does get very graphic. Still, I would definitely give this book 5 stars, 2 thumbs up. If you're interested in an Eastern fantasy, then definitely pick this one up. And just so you know, this author is literally so young. She's in graduate school. Like, she's like my age, I feel like, which is so impressive and also just so sad. So we're getting to the end of February, and this is what I read: To All the Boys I Loved Before by Jenny Han. I actually watched the movie before I read this, and I feel like that's an abomination in and of itself, but I also like the movie better. I think this has only happened like one other time in my entire life because I liked the Notebook movie better than I liked the book. And I'm not saying that the book doesn't have charms of its own, because it definitely does, and I think you will get something out of it if you like the movie to read the book, because it's definitely a change and it's definitely interesting. However, most of the reason I liked the movie was because of Peter Kavinsky and the way that Noah Centineo played him. And even though he's kind of like a jerk sometimes, like playfully a jerk, he doesn't reach the heights that book Kavinsky does. I just didn't really like Kavinsky at all during this book, except maybe at the end. And I think that's enough to get me to read the next book in this series, but I'm definitely like not in a rush. But if you're looking for a nice summer romantic comedy kind of book, then definitely pick this up. I mean, it's not even that long and it definitely keeps you on your toes. We're gonna give a thumbs up on this one, and not just because of Noah Centineo. Okay, March. First thing I read in March was The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This was the first Holly Black book I'd ever read, and to be honest, I was a little bit unsure about this book. I was a little scared it was going to be like a carbon copy of ACOTAR, which is ironic considering I read Rhapsodic for the same purpose. And when I first started this book, I actually wasn't sure if I was going to like it, but I think once I hit a certain point, like it was never to the point where I wanted to stop, really. And when I got to a certain point in the book, I I couldn't stop reading. Like, I read all day. I think the only similarity it has to ACOTAR is that there is that fae king, fae prince aspect, but it's definitely more of a traditionally fae sense. Plus there's this whole other side of the world that's human and modern, which I didn't think I was gonna like, but I actually kind of enjoyed that contrast. It's about this girl Jude who ends up in the fae realm even though she is a human, because her mother was actually married to a fae lord and she had a child to him and then ended up running away to the human realm. So Jude's older half-sister is part fae, but her and her twin sister are human. So the Fae Lord comes to kind of take his revenge, I don't know, and then takes them all back to the Fae realm where they live and grow up. Then of course starts the dynamic between Jude and the main male character, Carden. I liked Carden because he feels realistic to me. He is a jerk, like he bullies Jude, and even though he has Jude, and even though he has hidden depth like every other character, he's definitely not perfect. Like, one day he doesn't just change and he's nice. Like, he definitely still has problems, which I really like about him. I also really liked Jude as a protagonist. She came off a little bit annoying at first, which is fine because character development. I just really liked her because she's such a compassionate and yet also such a ambitious character. Anyway, if you're thinking about trying this series, I would definitely recommend it. I think it's unique enough that it warrants that. I would give it like 4 stars, but definitely a thumbs up for me. Alright, carrying on, we're still in March. The next book I read was The Elegance of the Hedgehog by Muriel Barbary. This was another book I read for school. It was actually a course about French culture, French history, French lifestyle. I was definitely pleasantly surprised by this book, even though I kind of had a good feeling about it because my friend really gave it high honors. So this book is dual perspective and it takes place in an apartment building in France. It switches between Renee, who is the building's concierge, and a little girl named Paloma who lives there. Even though the book kind of pulls you in with the plot point that Paloma is thinking about killing herself, she's trying to find a single thing that she should really live for. It's actually more character-driven than it is plot-driven. Neither of the characters really do a lot. I mean, it all takes place in the same building, practically. But they're two very similar characters. They're both cerebral, kind of witty, philosophical. Paloma basically identifies herself as a child genius. And they both basically are geniuses that are kind of hiding how smart they are, for fear that they'll attract unwanted attention. But as the book progresses, they kind of develop together, not necessarily like in the same room or with each other, just separately. The experiences they have, the people they meet in this apartment building change how they view life and how they view their lives specifically. It was definitely kind of a hard book to get through just because there's so many brainy references. They're constantly reading material that even I haven't read, or making references to art and literature that I have very little idea about. I think if you push through, it's definitely worth it. Definitely leaves a lasting impression, and I would recommend it. I would definitely give this book 4 stars and a thumbs up. Just keep in mind that you might have to kind of suffer through references that you don't understand. Alright, it's time for April. The first book I read in April was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. If you haven't seen my vlog from the British Museum, I mentioned this book because there was a reference to Achilles. I feel like I do know a lot about Greek mythology, but there are definitely a lot of missing pieces, and Achilles and Patroclus were definitely one of those stories that I just don't know about. Obviously, I think everyone's heard the term Achilles heel, but I didn't realize that that was a newer development, and that at least the way that Madeline Miller is writing, she's writing from sources, you know, like the Odyssey, that were actually written during that time period, and the Achilles heel wasn't a thing. It was just Achilles fell because he was defeated. So yeah, this was an Achilles and Patroclus retelling from the view of Patroclus. Is that how you say his name? I've heard Patroclus too. Guys, I'm really not exaggerating when I say I was blown away by this book. If you don't know the tale of Achilles, or of Achilles and Patroclus, Achilles was a demigod born of a human male and a sea goddess. So it is about Achilles and Patroclus being together and how their relationship hurt or helped his ultimate fate. I I think they're both very lovable characters with very obvious flaws. I've heard it said that Patroclus was too submissive or reserved for some people, like he felt flat to them, and I kind of don't agree. I think part of the reason I liked his character so much is because he was vulnerable and because he didn't care that everyone around him was like, you're a man, like, why are you not a warrior? That being said, I definitely love both of them. I literally have fan art saved in my phone. I definitely recommend this book. If you're gonna read any of these books that I say, please read this book. 5 stars, thumbs up. So between reading The Song of Achilles and Cersei by Madeline Miller, I ended up reading Watcher in the Woods by Kelly Armstrong. Kelly Armstrong has been a staple in my entire life since I was like 11. If you know of or have read the Summoning series, aka the Darkest Power series, that was my favorite book for like my entire life. Like, it's still kind of secretly like my favorite series. So with that being said, I'll kind of read anything that Kelly Armstrong writes, but I do truly have to recommend her mystery series, Rockton. The first book in that series is City of the Lost, and this is the 4th book in the series. It's about a girl named Casey who is an investigator in the city. When she was younger, she ended up in an altercation where she murdered somebody. She was never caught for that, but it contributes to her decision to go to a place called Rockton. So Rockton is basically this secluded community that is hidden in the Yukon. Casey decides to apply to go there in order to hide from what she thinks are people coming after her for the murder of this one person. But when she ends up going there, they need her services as an investigator to figure out Rockton's first murder. I think Rockton has the most fascinating setting I've ever seen in a novel, especially a mystery series. I feel like mystery series are kind of repetitive, and Rockton never really is repetitive because of the setting. It's such a unique place because they're in the middle of the Yukon in a community filled with people that are trying to escape something. A lot of them are abuse survivors or petty criminals, but there are a few of them that are dangerous, and Casey kind of has to figure out who's dangerous and who's not. Anyway, so that's kind of all I'll give away about this series. Obviously I liked it enough to read to the 4th book. I think if you like mystery, or even if you don't like mystery, I would give this series a shot because it's just such a unique plot and such a unique setting that even if you don't typically like mystery, you might actually like this series. Definitely 5 stars. As far as this book goes, I would give this like a 4.5 because it renewed my interest in the series because a new character was introduced. So this book specifically would get a 4.5 review, but the first book in the series as a whole, I mean, 5 stars. Just read it, please. Okay, now we can talk about Cersei. After I finished The Song of Achilles, I knew I liked her style of writing. I knew I liked the way that she portrayed these stories. So I was really excited to read Cersei. Thank you again for letting it to me. And I was not disappointed. I think if I had to choose between the two, I would choose The Song of Achilles, but Cersei is amazing for a whole nother reason. So if you don't know the story of Cersei, she was the daughter of Helios, the god of the sun, and she ended up not having an affinity for the godlike things that her dad and other people had. She ended up having an affinity for witchcraft. Cersei is extremely different from her siblings, from her family, but she gets to a point where she owns that about herself. It's a very feministic kind of novel. Like, it made me feel empowered as a woman, obviously not as a witch because I'm not one. And it definitely had that like aesthetic of like the wood witch who like lives in a hut and has like herbs hanging from the ceiling and like a pet like tiger. Cersei honestly is just like a bad A. Anyway, so this novel was fun because you got to see a lot of Greek figures show up, like famous people, including Odysseus. Odysseus shows up in The Song of Achilles too, which was exciting for me, but it's in a different capacity obviously in this book because, well, if you haven't read the Odyssey, then I'll just leave that for you to figure out. Anyway, if you're looking for an empowering, fantastical, bad A kind of standalone, then I would definitely pick this up. 5 stars from me, thumbs up, please read, it's great. Alright, so the last thing I read in April was Am Malala by Malala Yousafzai. I really hope I pronounced that name right. This is one of the books that I already unshelved. The other book was The Crime of the Congo by Arthur Conan Doyle. Both of these were books that I was assigned to read last semester. And while I did enjoy Am Malala to some extent, The Crime of the Congo is definitely a school assigned reading kind of book. I won't really get into that one. except to say that it does have some really interesting information about the Congo Free State. But as far as Am Malala goes, I definitely appreciated this book for what it was about and also for the person that wrote it, but it wasn't one of the books that I would keep. I think I would try to read a book that she wrote later in her life, but as far as this book went, it was nice to read once and kind of get a better understanding about what the Taliban was like for people like Malala who lived in Swat. But it also wasn't written in a way that I would probably ever read it again. It's definitely a very repetitive book, and it focuses on the history of Pakistan probably more than Malala's life, at least prior to her going to England and all of that stuff happening to her near the end. So there's a big chunk of the book that is dedicated to very technical, very intricate Pakistani history. I'm glad that I'm more informed now, but like I said, probably wouldn't read this again, and I think I gave it like a 3.5 stars. If you're interested in knowing her story, because she is the girl that fought for education, she is the girl that won the Nobel Peace Prize at such a young age, definitely read this, or at least, you know, give it a shot, because she's just like an amazing person. Like, she is the girl that you look up to in today's age. For that reason, thumbs up for me. However, if you are not into nonfiction, memoir, biography typically, then this will probably not be the book for you. Okay, we're finally into May. This is probably where things decline. The first book I read was Verity by Colleen Hoover. I've only ever read one other Colleen Hoover book so far, but this book was so recommended on the book club group that I am in that I couldn't ignore it any longer. This is one of those books that really draws you in. It doesn't necessarily have like the most unique plotline. In fact, if you've heard of or read A Simple Favor, it's kind of similar in that way, except the main character of this book, Lowen, is a writer who is commissioned to finish a mystery series written by a very famous author. Basically, Lowen goes to the estate of this author, meets her husband, and things happen. I think for the most part this was a pretty creepy, pretty intriguing book. I didn't really like how it ended, but then I don't like how most mysteries end, so if you're looking for a fast, mysterious, kind of intriguing read, then I would give this a shot. The audiobook was pretty good, but it still only gets about 3 stars for me, and considering I've read It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover, I kind of have high standards where her writing's concerned, because that book is so good. So we're just gonna, I don't know, it's up to you what you want to read at this point in time. This is kind of for all the books that I've done so far. Next up for me was Coraline by Neil Gaiman. Growing up, I always really liked Coraline. I always liked anything that was remotely creepy. So I wanted to read this book because it was free at the library, and I took it on my Kindle to London. I don't have too much to say about this book. I think the book was maybe a little bit creepier than the movie. So if you're not a kid and you're looking to read this book, then it probably won't bore you, and it's a quick read. If you are someone who has kids, I think this book would be fine to read to them, unless they're easily scared, in which case probably not. I don't really know how to rate this book considering it's a kid's book, but come on, we all know that Neil Gaiman's books are good, so you can make your own decision about that. Okay, starting off June, we have The Mister by E.L. James. So I honestly don't usually read books like this, but I recently saw an interview with E.L. James, and she was talking about this book. When I got back from London, I was feeling a bit sad because I missed London, and I knew that this was set in London. Basically, this follows a guy named Maxim who inherits the title of Earl from his late brother. He's like the classic ladies' man. He never has a problem finding a girl to go to bed with. And then he gets a new housekeeper. I won't get too far into the plot for this because I might do a separate video about this book. I don't know, if you want that, then comment below and tell me. But basically, his new housekeeper is a girl named Alessia, who is a wonderful piano player, so that's nice. And guys, I honestly don't know how to get into this without like actually going through the plot. So all I'll say is Alessia does not feel like a real character, which really sucks because, you know, in these kind of romantic stories, the guy is always, you know, the rich protector man, and the girl is always kind of the submissive, like, doesn't know anything about anything, and he has to like inform her. But it just seemed like worse in this book. Like, I think you can tell the difference between like a well-written character and a badly written character by how well you can imagine or see their thinking process, and she just like doesn't have one. Plus, it goes without saying that Maxim is like a total jerk who transforms overnight, it feels like. I think the creepiest thing about this novel is that Alessia really often felt like a little kid, which was really uncomfortable for obvious reasons. But anyway, I think from what I've said, you can pretty much conclude that I didn't enjoy this at all. Even if you like romance books, I wouldn't reach for this one. This is not a good example of like a romance book. Thumbs down. With that being said, I do have a good example of a romance novel, and that is the Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. I actually bought this at the same time that I bought The Mister, because I thought this was kind of in the same vein as Crazy Rich Asians. I don't know, I just got, it was a recommendation with Crazy Rich Asians, so the girl at the register was probably like, ooh, she's feeling spicy. No, I wasn't, I just wanted a cute story, okay? Anyway, so the protagonist of this story is a girl named Stella who works with algorithms. She basically comes up with the way that customers purchase things. Stella has Asperger's, which is an extremely unique and extremely wanted aspect of a romance novel. Thank you, Helen. But Stella is basically being pressured by her family to get married, have kids, the whole shebang. Because she feels like she is not good at having a relationship or doing things that you do in a relationship, she ends up hiring a male escort named Michael Fan. It's not an entirely unique synopsis. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of the story of the girl or the guy hires an experienced person and blah 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 blah. But the thing that makes this book so unique is the fact that Stella is autistic and she processes things differently, and that affects how she communicates with Michael and how she communicates with her family. It's a really sweet story, and I really enjoyed both her and Michael. They both really defied expectations, which was really refreshing throughout the book, because romance novels are known for doing that. They're known for continuing tropes. This book, while in some sense it does have tropes, they're done well and yet also done differently. I honestly had such a big book hangover from this book, so I would give it 5 stars, like thumbs up. If you enjoy romance, or even if you don't, if you just enjoy fiction, this is a really nice book, and it's really sweet, and it's really, just read it, okay? Alright guys, we're at the end. I only have one more for you, and that is The Coldest Girl in Coldtown by Holly Black. Having read The Cruel Prince earlier this year, I thought I knew what Holly Black's writing style was, but I was wrong. I wasn't sure if I was gonna like The Coldest Girl in Coldtown. I actually didn't even know what it was about. I kind of vaguely knew it might involve vampires, but it follows a girl named Tana who lives in a world where vampires came out like years ago. So to kind of keep the infection or the virus contained, the United States at least created places called Coldtowns where they could house all of the vampires or the infected. Tana one day wakes up from a party at a friend's house only to realize that everyone at the party is dead. Things happen, her friend ends up being infected, and she has to buckle down and get him to a cold town. So I kind of grew up with like the Vampire Explosion, Vampire Diaries, Twilight, and I can understand why some people would definitely lean away from a book like this because it's a vampire novel, but I was super impressed by this book. I really liked the writing, and I really liked the protagonist. If I had to choose like my favorite YA protagonist, it might literally be Tana. She's somehow realistic without being whiny, and she's actually one of the few protagonists that I've read that can claim to be a bad A, or people can say she's a bad A when she actually is a bad A. She's a protagonist that actually buckles down and does things for herself. This didn't really feel like a YA novel, I think, because she was actually very mature. So if you have any interest in vampires or good YA standalones, then give this a try. Get rid of your vampire prejudices and read this book. Like, I think it's like 5 stars. Like, which hardly ever happens for YA standalones for me. Anyway guys, so that's the end of this video. If you made it to the end, thank you for sticking through. That was 24 books. I'm hoping that for the rest of the year I can really push myself to go outside my comfort zone. I'm hoping to read some more historical fiction, some fantasy books that I've been putting off, and maybe even some mystery. I mean, honestly, I'm kind of feeling that right now. If you've read any of these books this year or before, please comment below and let me know what you thought of them, if you agree with me or not. It's okay if you didn't agree with me, it's okay. I'll be uploading my last London vlog this Thursday coming up, and I'll have a new video up on Saturday, hopefully with a book haul. Yeah, I have some ideas about that. Anyway, yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. Stay tuned for Thursday, and if you liked this video, please comment, like, and subscribe. Thank you so much.